In this video, I'm going to tell you about the dangers of microplastics and how you can protect yourself from them effectively, easily, and cheaply. Microplastics are pretty much everywhere and can cause a lot of harm to you, such as severely reducing your testosterone, your ability to reproduce, your brain function, and it can also cause cancer, along with many other problems. Fortunately, simple methods such as filtering your drinking water, eating fermented food and using the sauna regularly can significantly reduce the harmful effects of microplastics on you. I'm going to present a lot of different methods and materials that are useful for reducing microplastics and the damage they cause, but you definitely don't have to do all of them to get results. I recommend that you focus on a few of them to begin with and then later implement more of them into your life. How to thrive in a sea of plastic pollution. Microplastics are degraded plastic particles that are smaller than 5 millimeters in size, while nanoplastics are particles that are smaller than 1 micrometer. They can take up to thousands of years to break down, and the particle on the right here is a plastic microbead that's about half a millimeter wide. This can be found in products such as cleansing or scrubbing products. There are some good videos on YouTube about microplastics by Rhonda Patrick, Andrew Huberman, Brian Johnson, and also one by Siim, who interviews Anthony J., who is the author of a book called Estrogeneration, which talks about a lot of ways to reduce microplastics damage. These videos are linked below, so I'm going to include their most important points and then focus on methods that have not been mentioned in those videos. Quote, "Ingestion is the primary route of exposure, and we are consuming about 5 grams of micro and nanoparticles per week. That's the equivalent of a credit card," end quote. Said Philip Democritou, the founding director of the Environmental Health Nanoscience Laboratory and the Center for Nanotechnology and Nanotoxicology at the School of Public Health. However, there is a significant disagreement on the amount that we are actually ingesting. This other study concludes that we are ingesting not 5 grams per week, but 5 grams per 23,000 years. So this is obviously an enormous disagreement. So we can probably conclude that we don't know the amount reliably yet that we are ingesting. Some of the main sources of microplastics are bottled water, tap water, airborne microplastics, plastic packaged food and beverages, and more sources are toothpaste and cosmetics, beer and other beverages if they are made with contaminated water and stored in plastic or cans. Seafood and fruits and vegetables unfortunately also contain some microplastics, however, this should not be a reason to avoid these amazing foods. And tea bags also contain microplastics. Some of the most toxic microplastics are PVC or polyvinyl chloride, which contains phthalates, lead and cadmium. PES or polystyrene, which is neurotoxic, PET or polyethylene terephthalate, which contains antimony and phthalates, and PP or polypropylene, which causes oxidative stress and inflammation, and nylon, which contains toxic chemical additives that can cause oxidative damage. Some of the most toxic microplastics components or building blocks for microplastics are bisphenol A, which is in can linings, polycarbonate, some receipt paper, some types of PVC, and it causes reproductive harm and oxidative damage. And phthalates, which are used to soften PVC, and they can also cause reproductive harm. And they are also in many other things. These are just the primary sources. In 2023, the European Food and Safety Agency, or EFSA, determined a new tolerable daily intake of BPA, which was lowered from 4 micrograms per kilogram of body weight per day, all the way down to 0.2 nanograms per kilogram of body weight per day. This is a reduction by a factor of 20,000 that was done because of new science that showed how toxic BPA is to the human body. This corresponds to 14 nanograms per day for a 70 kilogram human. Quote, "In the EU, 92% of the sample population showed levels of BPA in urine that exceeded 11.5 nanograms per liter of total urinary BPA," end quote. And since we're excreting the vast majority of the BPA through urine, this means that the vast majority of the EU citizens are getting more BPA than what the EFSA considers to be safe. This first study concluded that canned soup contains very large amounts of BPA, so they had some volunteers that ate either fresh soup or canned soup, after which the BPA in their urine was measured. In the first group, they had a level of 1.1 micrograms per liter after eating the fresh soup, which is already too high according to EFSA. And the second group that got the canned soup had a level of 20.8 micrograms per liter, and this is actually 19 times higher than the first group, and this amount is also 750 times higher than the EFSA limit. So we probably shouldn't eat too much canned soup. Microplastics has been found everywhere that researchers have looked for it in the body, such as the brain, the heart, the testicles, ovaries, and more. And they can cause cancer, reproductive problems, low testosterone, and a lot more. For this reason, a reduction in intake is very important. For water, you should get either a carbon block filter or a reverse osmosis system or a water distiller. If you want to get a good carbon filter, you can use the Berkey, which can remove down to 24 nanometer particles. Quotes from Berkey's website. One study published in the journal Environmental Science and Pollution Research found that Berkey filters were able to remove up to 99.9% of microplastics from water samples. However, another study published in the journal Water Research found that while Berkey filters were effective in removing larger microplastics, they had limited success in removing smaller particles. End quote. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find these studies. For food, you should stop eating from plastic containers, particularly if the food is wet and warm. However, solids in plastic containers are not as bad. You should use clothes made from natural materials instead of synthetic fibers, such as cotton, bamboo, linen, hemp, wool, or silk. This should not have the highest priority, but it's a good thing to start doing at some point. And you should avoid handling receipts. BPA has been banned in receipts in the EU, but what are they using instead? The alternatives don't seem to be significantly less toxic. You should avoid processed food as it contains more microplastics, avoid chemical sunscreens as it can contain hormone disruptors, and you can use zinc oxide sunscreen instead. And if you have a pillowcase made of synthetic fibers, you should get one made from cotton instead to avoid exposure during sleep. Next study showed that sweating is also a very effective way of getting rid of BPA. Quote, urine concentration of BPA is slightly higher than in sweat, suggesting that induced sweating may be an efficient method for eliminating BPA from the body. So, if you sweat through exercise or sauna, it's going to increase your excretion of BPA, and you might be able to increase the efficiency of sauna by also adding niacin or vitamin B3 in the form of nicotinic acid, which creates a kind of flush in the body. There are many airborne microplastics particles, but these can be dealt with using a HEPA air filter. For sea salt, there's a very large variation in the microplastics content. Many people, including other microplastics video creators, assume that rock salt or Himalaya salt is safe, as it has not been exposed to the plastic in the oceans, such as sea salt has. However, this next study concludes that Himalaya salt is not safe. Quote, Himalayan pink salt from terrestrial or mined sources was found to have the highest microplastics load, that is, 174 particles per kilogram, end quote. And overall, microplastics contamination was higher in mined salts, such as black and Himalayan salt, than the marine sea salt. Next study concludes that salt from Asia is risky. In this figure, you can see the microplastics content of a lot of different salts. The blue ones are sea salt, the red are mine salt or rock salt, and the green are lake salts. You see an enormous variation here. We actually have a logarithmic scale. So it goes from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1000 to 10,000. So we have one that was over 10,000 particles per kilogram, and we have a few that were actually at 0 particles, including one from France. This map shows in general that salts from Asia are pretty risky, while the salts from Europe or USA seem to be very low in general in microplastics contamination. There's a website called mamavation.com which does consumer product testing aimed at helping moms reduce toxicity, that has also done some salt testing for both microplastics and heavy metals. So they tested them for other toxic metals. And another site called tamarubin.com which also does some testing, primarily of lead contamination. That's also recommended. For foods, cruciferous vegetables are very helpful for increasing the excretion rate of many toxic compounds, particularly broccoli sprouts or sulforaphane supplements. And dietary fiber probably also helps with the excretion of microplastics. In this picture you can see yogurt or kimchi or sauerkraut, which has all very good fermented foods. This study shows that probiotics can increase the elimination of microplastics. So they took various groups of rats where the control group was fed with BPA and the experimental groups were fed with BPA and either 5% Lactobacillus casei or 5% Bifidobacterium brevi, which are probiotics. And the rats that got the probiotics as well had a significantly reduced blood BPA concentration. And they had a 2.4 times greater BPA excretion through the feces, so this is very effective. So my recommendation is to make kimchi, sauerkraut or yogurt and eat 1 to 2 tablespoons with every meal. You can make this by buying probiotics that contain these 2 strains and then add them to the food and allow it to ferment. There are many recipes on YouTube for this. Probiotics can remove and also degrade BPA. In the next study here, quote, in our study, 5 potentially probiotic microorganisms, namely Lactococcus lactis, Bacillus subtilis, Lactobacillus plantarum, Enterococcus fecalis, and Saccharomyces cerevisiae were tested for their toxicity tolerance to BPA and their BPA removal ability. End quote. Quote, all strains exhibited BPA removal ability with increased removal rate between 0 and 24 hours of incubation. End quote. So the longer time these probiotics are in contact with the BPA, the more of it gets removed. Next study also demonstrated that they could find microorganisms in traditional kimchi that also degrade BPA. And the next study shows that vitamin A is essential in BPA detoxification. So they took various groups of mice. One of them was a control group that had normal amounts of vitamin A in the liver, and another group were mice that did not have any vitamin A in the liver. These mice were then exposed to BPA, and the control group, which had vitamin A, had normal detoxification processes of BPA in the liver, while the no vitamin A group had no detox process of BPA in the liver, so it's crucial to get enough vitamin A. You can get it from beef liver, cod liver oil, mackerel and salmon, and if you're eating beef liver or cod liver, you should eat a maximum of 100 grams a time and a maximum of 2 times a week so you don't get too much vitamin A. And if you eat cod liver oil, it's a maximum of 20 milliliters per day. Fenugreek extract can reduce the BPA damage. Fenugreek is a part of the spice mix called curry. In this study, they induced BPA testicular damage in mice, and they saw that when they also added fenugreek, it reduced the damage. And also Nigella oil or powder can also reduce BPA damage. They gave the mice 50 milligrams per kilogram per day of BPA, which corresponds to 1.2 grams per day for a 70 kilograms human. This is an enormous amount, about 100,000 times more than the limits set by EFSA. For the Nigella oil, they gave a dosage that corresponds to 23 milliliters per day for a 70 kilogram human. In this figure, you can see that when they added BPA, the T4 or thyroid hormone level almost dropped to half, while when they added the Nigella, the damage was cut in half. Estradiol, which is an estrogen, was significantly reduced by the BPA, about 30 to 40%, but almost normalized by the Nigella. My preferred methods for using Nigella is to either grind the seeds in a coffee grinder and mix it with honey, or to grind the seeds and put them in capsules with a capsule machine, as they taste very bitter. But if you're pregnant, you should not use high amounts, which is over 3 grams per day of powder or 1 milliliter of oil per day during pregnancy. It has been used traditionally without issues reported, but large amounts can cause problems. Chlorella can bind and remove microplastics. Chlorella is a single-celled algae which has a special cell wall that can bind to microplastics. In this study, they used 50 nanometer and 70 nanometer polystyrene particles. In the lower left, we have the control group, which was just chlorella cells without any microplastics, and the other 7 images are various amounts of microplastics added to the chlorella. You can see that the microplastics are binding to the surface of the chlorella, so if you eat chlorella, it's probably going to bind to a lot of microplastics that will then not enter your bloodstream. Next study shows that chlorella can reduce the BPA damage. They used African catfish that were fed microplastics and chlorella extract, and they observed that chlorella significantly reduced the damage caused by the microplastics. For LH or luteinizing hormone, the amount was reduced by about 15% by microplastics, but the damage was completely neutralized by chlorella. For FSH or follicle stimulating hormone, the level was reduced about 30% by microplastics, but it was completely normalized by chlorella. For testosterone, the level was reduced by about 25% by the microplastics, but almost normalized by chlorella. And for estradiol, the microplastics reduced the level by about 15%, which was completely normalized by the chlorella. The sperm count was more than halved by the microplastics, and it was completely normalized by chlorella. And the motility, which is how good the sperm cells are at swimming around, was almost halved by the microplastics and completely normalized by the chlorella. These are very impressive results. Now, they did use a very high dosage of chlorella in this study, which corresponds to 7.5 grams per day of chlorella extract for a human. This corresponds to 15 to 75 grams per day of whole chlorella or chlorella powder, while a typical dosage for humans is 3 to 9 grams per day. However, even 9 grams per day should also give a very significant result in humans. Anthocyanins also reduce BPA damage. Anthocyanins are compounds that give the color to berries, purple corn, and to many other foods, and they have a lot of health improving effects. BPA in this study caused rats to have worse memory, while rats that got both BPA and anthocyanins had a much smaller reduction in memory. Also, anthocyanins protected against Alzheimer's-like brain problems because of its antioxidant effects. The rats got a dosage that corresponds to 150 milligrams of anthocyanins for humans, which is relatively easy to obtain. The easiest way to consistently get anthocyanins is through capsules, but my preferred method is in the form of purple cornbread, which I've made videos about previously. And I also have some links to where you can buy capsules and whole purple corn below. Next study confirms that anthocyanins can reduce BPA damage. They conclude that anthocyanins are effective at reducing a long list of the negative effects of BPA, such as fatty liver. Next study, the same story. They looked at BPA toxicity in zebrafish embryos and concluded that anthocyanins protected the embryos from brain damage from BPA. Next study had rats that were fed BPA, which caused damage to their reproduction, while the rats that were also fed anthocyanins had a strongly reduced amount of damage. So the anthocyanins significantly reduced damage to the sperm and hormone levels such as testosterone. Sulforaphane is another interesting compound that can also reduce BPA damage. In this study, they used human liver cells. When they added BPA to the liver cells, they saw that the triglyceride levels were increased. However, when they then added sulforaphane, the triglyceride levels more than normalized. They used an amount that corresponds to 5 milligrams of sulforaphane for humans, or the amount that you can get by eating 20 grams of broccoli sprouts. So, BPA caused fatty liver, which was significantly reduced by sulforaphane. Propolis can also reduce BPA damage. This is a substance made by bees from tree sap, and they're using it to insulate their hive. Quote, propolis supplementation significantly improved fish growth and feed intake, which were significantly reduced by BPA exposure. CoQ10 is another way to reduce BPA damage. This is an important compound for energy that occurs naturally in our body, but often gets too low when we get older. So in a nematode, which is a small worm that was exposed to BPA, CoQ10 reversed the reproductive damage that was caused by BPA. And then we have a bit of a theoretical thing. We have 2 studies here that show that if you have a body of water that is contaminated with methylene blue, if you add microplastics to the water, it's going to bind to the methylene blue so you can easily remove it from the water. Methylene blue is a very interesting molecule that can support energy production in humans. So here we have the theoretical consideration. If polyethylene microplastics and methylene blue bind to each other, maybe the reverse will happen as well. So when a human eats methylene blue, it binds to the polyethylene microplastics and makes removal easier. However, this has not been strongly demonstrated yet. And the next study confirms this mechanism. Here it was 90% effective at removing methylene blue from water. There's also other antioxidants that can reduce BPA, such as vitamin C, vitamin E, melatonin, quercetin, which you can get from onions, lycopene, which you can get from tomatoes, and ginseng. Brian Johnson is a tech millionaire that offers consumer microplastic testing. He tests for a lot of the most dangerous microplastics. This only tests the blood, not the particles stuck in the organs or the brain, but it should still be very useful. This costs $190 plus shipping, but unfortunately he's unable to ship to Denmark because of import restrictions. Dr. Anthony J., who wrote the book Estrogeneration, also recommends, quote, if you use the sauna and you exercise more and you eat healthy and you go into ketosis once in a while and you intermittent fast, it might take 6 months to clear these things out of your body. End quote. He also recommends to avoid soy because it can behave like an estrogen, and to avoid pesticides, especially atrazine and glyphosate. With regards to glyphosate, glycine is an amino acid that can function as an antidote to glyphosate and increases its excretion in the urine. You can either buy pure glycine or you can eat collagen, which contains a lot of glycine. He also has bronze, silver and gold plants for advanced levels of microplastic avoidance, which I have linked below. He also recommends for both men and women to check your testosterone. If your testosterone level is good, you're probably not having too big of a problem from microplastics. And he also agrees that we should watch out for chemical sunscreens because of estrogenic effects and to use zinc oxide instead. He recommends to get rid of personal care products with fragrances and to use most essential oils instead, as most of them are fine for most people. So, the main low-hanging fruit that I'm going to recommend is to get a water filter, either a carbon block filter such as the Berkey, a reverse osmosis system or a water distiller, to never or rarely drink plastic bottle liquids and use glass bottles instead, to never eat wet food in plastic and use glass instead, to use a sauna or do exercise regularly, to eat live yogurt, kimchi or sauerkraut daily, to eat either purple corn, anthocyanin capsules, chlorella, CoQ10, sulforaphane, propolis or nigella, or more of this regularly. And if you want to do more advanced steps, you can check out Anthony J's bronze, silver or gold plants. You can stop buying clothes that have synthetic fabrics, and you can replace synthetic carpets with natural ones, along with a lot of other methods. You should not spend all of your energy only on microplastics. You should also spend time and energy on optimizing sleep, sunlight, nutrition, emotional health, stress, social thriving, EMF reduction and meditation if you really want to thrive. I'm going to make a lot of more videos about these things.